All right, everybody, welcome in to episode 255 of the Leaning into Leadership podcast. Today's episode is a little different, and in all the best of ways. You're going to hear a conversation that I recorded with my good friend and collaborator, Dr. Frederick Buskey. Frederick is the host of the Assistant Principal podcast and does a lot of the same type of leadership coaching and support that I do with schools and districts around the country. And because this is a topic that we felt matters so very much to leaders everywhere, we are releasing this episode on both of our podcasts to make sure it reaches as many ears as possible. This conversation was sparked by a real question from the field. A leader that Frederick supports reached out about handling angry parents and those high emotional situations. And as soon as we started talking, we both knew this is not about having the perfect script in the moment. Rather, it's really about having the right approach, both before, during, and for that matter, after the conflict shows up. So in this episode, we're going to walk through a simple framework in 3 different phases. First, what to do before there ever is a problem. In other words, that building relationship capital with those around you. Second, we'll talk about what to do in the moment when a student incident occurs. So how do you separate the student from the behavior? How do you ensure you have clear documentation? And how are you making sure that you're keeping dignity intact? And then finally, we'll talk about what to do after the situation has been addressed. So what the parent conversation looks like and how to keep it from turning into a battle. Also, what do you do when the student reenters and ensure that they have some type of support, and also that there's a plan for when they reenter. Finally, we're going to zoom out on the skill that makes all of this work, and that's listening. That kind of listening that de-escalates. It builds trust, and it keeps you grounded when a parent tries to make something personal. Now, before we jump into today's conversation, a quick word from both of our wonderful partners, our wonderful sponsors. And this episode is brought to you by DigiCoach. Now, if you're a school leader trying to grow instruction without turning walkthroughs into those gotcha moments, DigiCoach helps you do it the right way, with clarity, with consistency, and with coaching at the center of all of your work. Now, DigiCoach makes the work easier, especially when it comes to capturing quick, meaningful classroom observations, organizing your look-fors, and most importantly, turning what you see in the classroom into better feedback conversations with your teachers. And see, DigiCoach is a tool that supports trust-based instructional leadership, not compliance-based walkthroughs. So if you're ready to bring more clarity, more alignment to your instructional coaching, check out DigiCoach and see how they can support you and your campus. That's digicoach.com. And when you visit, make sure you tell them that you heard about them here on the Leaning into Leadership podcast for special partner pricing. This episode is also brought to you by our friends at Hey Tutor. Now, Hey Tutor delivers customized, evidence-based, high-dosage math and ELA tutoring for K-12 districts all over the country. And they do this both in person and they do it online. Their programs are aligned to state standards and they're designed around real results. And here's the thing. Hey Tutor is one of the few tutoring models that has been both vetted and awarded Stanford's National Student Support Accelerator badge. Hey Tutor does the heavy lift for you. The recruiting, the training, the hiring, and managing tutors as Hey Tutor employees so districts don't have to scramble for staffing. And with their curriculum plus their platform tools, schools can track growth through an accessible dashboard for both tutors and for teachers. If your district is looking for tutoring support that's structured, scalable, and built for impact, Hey Tutor is definitely worth a look. Head over to heytutor.com and check them out. Or even better, hit the link down in our show notes to make sure they know you heard about them here on the Leading into Leadership podcast. All right, folks, let's get into this conversation with my friend Dr. Frederick Buskey. Let's talk about how we handle those highly charged conversations with angry parents. I'll see you on the other side.
Hey, Darren, it's great to be back together again.
Absolutely, man. I'm excited about this conversation. It's always fun to just sit and hang out and have some conversation with you. And just by happenstance, this time we're going to hit the record button.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a good one. But, let's start with a celebration. What are you celebrating today?
Oh my goodness, that's such a good question. I'm going to say this. So yesterday, and I think you know this, but I'll share this with our listeners. The last week or so, I have been flexing my time and not just nose to the grindstone in the work, but nose to the grindstone in some other work. Doing some work here on our house here in Omaha. Our intent in the spring is to move back to Colorado, down to the Front Range, be closer to family, those kinds of things. And so I'm celebrating that I've been able to set that time aside to really lean into that work and that the space we're working on is going to become my new office, hopefully right at the start of the new year. It's really close to finished. So I'm hoping over the holiday break that we are able to get me moved upstairs. So that's what I'm celebrating. How about you, my friend?
I am celebrating. Hmm. I hesitate. My just being honest, like my mental frame is not great right now. And I recorded a podcast. The people that listen regularly will already know my adventure here, but I've been struggling with some pretty significant knee issues, and they'll be resolved by the time people listen to this show. But the thing I keep trying to think about is to focus on what I can do and not focus on the limitations because it's easy to get, I'm a huge hiker and I haven't been out on a trail for 2 months and it's kind of driving me nuts, but I just keep trying to remember, we're able to sit here and have this podcast, and that's a blessing. I was at a conference last week that was just phenomenal, and I got to see Julie Hassan and a lot of our other friends, and you know it, it's sometimes I think when you're in the middle of something that's really weighing you down, it's easy when you get this "what are you celebrating?" question to go, "Oh, I don't know." But one of the beauties of this question is I do think it encourages us to focus on those positives and to dig into what's going well. So yeah, I guess I have the conference and meeting with friends and us being able to hang out together. I've got another person I'm going to talk to today, who I'm really going to enjoy being with. So those are it. That's
Yeah.
it.
So I want to circle back to something you said, and then we'll get to the topic we both want to talk about today. But it's a celebration that I think you kind of glossed over, that when people are now listening to this recording, your knee issue will have been resolved. I realize you have this stretch of time you have to go through, right, to get that taken care of. And maybe listeners for both podcasts, if you're if you're not aware of this, Frederick and I are really good friends. We are on a call at least once a week, frequently more than that. Not just because we do work together, but just genuinely because I consider Frederick such a great friend. So I'm certainly aware of what's going on with the knee, all of that kind of stuff. Man, when this episode drops, you'll be on the road to recovery, and that I think is something not to lose sight of.
I will cling to that, Darren.
There you go. Hey, whatever you can get, right? When you're in pain and you're awaiting, that type of a procedure and that kind of stuff. Yeah, you take anything you can get.
Yeah. All right. I guess we should get into it. So I had a listener and reader of my daily email reach out to me a couple weeks ago and just kind of talk about a situation that was really challenging for her around dealing with angry parents. And she was just asking for some input or asked me to do a show on like how do you handle parents when they come in and they're really upset about something? So you and I kind of had a quick back and forth and mapped a couple things out. And I think just being really transparent, like if your first contact with that parent is in the middle of a really nasty situation, that's not a great place to be in. And what you probably have to do is go back and start to think about your systems. So I think we're going to take on the one hand, a holistic approach, like there's three phases, right? What are we doing before there's ever a problem? What are we doing when we got the student in our office? And then what are we doing when that part of it is over? And then we'll do kind of a little bit more of a deeper dive into how do we actually have that really challenging discussion. Does that sound good?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a topic that we find more and more frequent. Since you and I had that initial conversation, you reached out and mentioned this topic. I had one of the schools that I support in a slightly different way, but we sat down and had some conversations. So I've got some more to bring to the table, but I'll share their scenario a little bit. In their particular scenario, it was high school, an athletic event, specifically a basketball game. The parent who I guess for some reason felt it was more important to heckle the other student section than to just simply cheer for his
Oh
child,
my.
to the extent of going and actually sitting down in the student section. And when asked to leave, got really belligerent, even got belligerent with the police. So that scenario, yeah, I was on site the day after for that conversation, which turned into a really great coaching moment. So the challenge of parents who escalate, I guess. This is going to be a great conversation, and this is going to bring so much value to both your listening audience and mine. Which, by the way, folks, is why Frederick and I chose to simulcast this on both of our podcasts because we want to make sure we know that we have a shared audience, but we also have a non-shared audience. So if this can get into every single ear, I think that's huge. So that's my little bit of editorializing. So I'll throw it back over to you. But yeah, that was a scenario that I was greeted with last week.
All right, we're going to come back to that one.
I could see you light up a little bit on that one.
Yeah.
So
Well, and so are we ever going to get to the show? Um,
maybe, yeah.
when I was coaching middle school girls basketball, we'd had a team. We'd started out, we lost all our games, and after the third game, the athletic director came up to me. He goes, "Frederick, this is going to be a long year. We weren't that good, but." The kids started to believe. We started to turn things around, and they were learning to play hard and trust each other. And we wound up stringing together like 16 straight wins and
Wow.
went to the little conference playoff game against middle school girls. So, it's not a huge deal, but it's a big deal for them. We get into the game, and this is the semifinals, and we win the game. Super, super close game. I didn't play as many players off the bench as I usually do. We won the game. Everybody's pumped because we're going to the championship, right? And after the game with the girls, we're getting on the bus, and one of the parents comes up to me and he grabs my arm. I'm ready to get on the bus, and he grabs my arm to stop me because he wants to complain because his daughter didn't get in the game. And that's another thing, right? Should every kid play in every game in middle school? We can have that discussion, but
Right.
yeah, literally grabbed my arm. So I get the athletics piece of it.
Yeah.
It rears
Oh
its
yeah.
ugly head from time to time.
Yeah. Yes, it does. And I was the head girls basketball coach, coached middle school boys basketball. Yeah, I've certainly had a couple of those moments too that they can be challenging.
Yeah.
But let's get back
Yep.
to the original, the original reach out, the email that one of your listeners, one of your readers had gotten into, and then let's kind of chase it from there.
Yeah. So, and I think the first step that we want to hit is before a problem ever happens is building capital in advance. Now I'm bringing a lot of things to this discussion from special ed perspective. I was a county level special education coordinator, so that's a little bit unique, but it was pretty clear to me, especially after a year or two on the job, like I knew who the parents were, who the kids were, who the families were, that I had to be more proactive and that I had to encourage my teachers to be more proactive. So I think identifying the students and families that are going to need that extra care, and I say that truly extra care, right? I don't think we can look at these people as problem families, right? If you've got a parent that can be kind of volatile, it's probably because they got a lot of stuff going on in their life. And so understanding that these are people that need extra care and extra attention, identifying them on the front end, and then reaching out to build those relationships and having positive contacts, I think is absolutely critical.
Yeah, I would agree. And I know I appeared distracted over here looking on my bookshelf, but I was looking specifically for a book by Crystal Frommert. We were fortunate enough to publish it a couple of years ago here at Road to Awesome. Crystal wrote a book titled "When Calling Parents Isn't Your Calling." Folks will link that in the show notes for you so you can go check it out. And one of the things that Crystal really goes at heavy, I use this in the course that I teach at Fort Hays State University as one of the elements. I don't use the whole book. I use a podcast that Crystal was on, but I link the book for people. And she talks very heavily about getting out in front of it. That positive connection from the beginning is so, so important. And when you're in a building or in a role like you had said as the special ed coordinator, you do get to know the parents and you know who might, as you said, need that extra care. Listening to you talk about that took me back to a moment in time. I heard Lori Kagan, the wife of Dr. Spencer Kagan, once say at a conference, the individuals that we label as troubled, problems, not on board, 99% of them just simply want to be heard.
Mm.
And that has always stuck with me. I think that's the truth with those parents who we label as tough, problem, the oh boy, look out for this one. We've all heard those phrases. But those parents, mostly, they're still the 1%, but most of them, they just simply want to be heard. And what you're talking about with getting out in front of it and building those relationships from the beginning, it's just essentially that making deposits. You can't make withdrawals if you haven't made deposits. And so you've got to really lean into building those relationships. We talked about athletics a little bit. As a high school principal, certainly I was at every home basketball game, every home football game. And I know who our quote problem parents were going to be, the ones who potentially could go grab the coach, the ones who, were going to complain because their kid wasn't getting all the moments or getting all the touches or scoring all the points or whatever it is. And I leaned a lot into that philosophy. The more opportunity that I could get in their ear to give them some face time with me, then hey, I'm willing to listen to what they're frustrated about. Again, they just want to be heard. And I'm not going to let them go get heard by the coach because that's not productive. But if they feel like they need to be heard, hey, as the building principal, I was in the perfect role for that. I didn't even want that to be my AD. I wanted that to be me. Again, same thing with my AD. That's not going to be productive. Talk to the principal, build that relationship, give them that opportunity to share what their concerns and what their frustrations are. And that's fine. They're not looking for you to agree with them, but they certainly want to be heard.
Yeah. Darren, I think another thing that's happening now, maybe more than in the past, is we're kind of a society that with the social media is thriving on conflict, right? And all the media is trying to bait emotion. So they're always showing you the stuff that's going to get you angry. So I can imagine that a lot of people right now are kind of living in a world that is full of conflict. And in that environment, it's really easy for parents to forget that we're on the same team. And again, that's not a dig at them. It's just kind of the way things are. And so they come into school, they've had conflict everywhere else, so they come into school prepared for conflict. And it's
Yeah, and
important for us
not to
to remember
interrupt you,
that.
Frederick, but it's important too to remember that we as the educators sometimes forget that we're all on the same team. It's not a one-way street. It's a two-way street, man. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're 100% on with that. And the number of times that I've heard teachers say we're a team, but then in the same breath, but I want you to do it my way and listen to me, right? It is a two-way street. Hey, you're gonna put we'll have the link to that podcast in the show notes with Crystal Fromer. And then I've got another episode I did with Jamie Brown where we actually talked about how you teach a teacher to make that positive phone call home, because that's another thing I think we sometimes lose sight of. I've never seen a teacher education program that taught teachers how to call home.
Oh,
So,
correct.
so it is not a skill that people just automatically have. And I think sometimes we can get frustrated as administrators that teachers aren't reaching out to parents and being proactive. But we have to remember if they're not doing it, then we need to take some ownership for that and go down and teach them and encourage them.
Absolutely. And I would add, we need to model it too. I had this conversation yesterday with one of my administrators and, frustrated that teachers aren't making those initial calls home like they had expected them to. And I just asked, what has your team done? Has your team done any of that? What are you doing to model that? Because if you're not willing to do it yourself, don't expect them to do it. So I don't we don't want to stay on this part of the topic forever. So I'll stop there. But I think it's important that we think about as the leaders how we show up every day is going to make a big difference on what others do too.
Yeah. Okay. Spoiler alert. I do, we do, you do. Bring them in the
There we go.
office. I make the call, have a script, then we do it together, and then you do it. All right, we'll move on. So, have we wrapped up that piece about building capital in advance? I mean, it's really about that contact. And I think it's about finding the strengths in the student and being, you've got to be sincere in that. But every kid has bright spots. So, find the bright spots and just reach out and share with the family. Great if it comes from the teacher, but you probably also want to figure out a way to make that contact if you know this is somebody that you're probably going to have a tough conversation with at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. That is such an essential element, and I think that leads us into the next piece really, really well, and that is how do we actually have the meeting with the student? This and or the parent, like in the athletic situation that I mentioned. But how do we begin that conversation? And we'll focus specifically on the student. And when you and I talked about kind of how we wanted to put this particular podcast together, this piece really resonated with me. And I had the opportunity, somebody I've known for a long time, Dr. Keith Bell, who is a professor at Ohio State University, former principal superintendent. I know him through Jocelyn's Renaissance. I've known Keith for 20 years. He's a Jocelyn's Renaissance Hall of Fame member. But I heard him speak one time specifically about separating the behavior of the student from the student themselves. And the way Keith did this, he did this on a big stage, 3,000 people in the audience, and he sat a chair down. He sat two chairs across from himself, and he put a backpack in the other chair. And he was very intentional to model. He had somebody come up on stage and be the student who had done whatever the behavior was. And when he spoke about the behavior, he spoke to the backpack, and he told the student very intentionally, this is your behavior over here. Your behavior isn't you. So when I want to talk to you, I'm going to talk to you. When I want to talk about the behavior, I'm going to talk to your backpack because you've got to know that while I'm disappointed in the behavior, there's no way in the world I'm disappointed in you. And that has resonated for this probably was 10 years ago that I saw Keith do this. separating the behavior from the kid. And I know our good friends Josh Stamper and Charlie Peck would say that behavior is communication, and that's very true. But a lot of times, I think educators, whether it's the administrator or the teacher, they connect the two, and the anger about the behavior becomes anger at the student, and it becomes a conflict. So that's kind of where I wanted to open this, and then I want to let you run from there.
What I think related to that is that kids can't use the skills they don't have. And so a lot of times kids just don't have that skill. Now, it can also be like we back up with the causation. A kid may cuss a teacher out in class. That might actually, the conflict with the teacher might not be the issue that set the kid off, right? Maybe it was that in second period, things started getting spread around on social media, and then it cooked even more at lunchtime. And they came in, they were already feeling really angry and anxious and didn't know what was going to happen when they got home, and their Instagram was going nuts. And then they get into class and the teacher says, hey, pull out your pencil or whatever it is. And the kid just goes off. So I think that goes back to that idea of the behavior versus the student is really important, and understanding the skills. Darrin, when a kid comes in the office, if you're the administrator and okay, this is not just a routine thing, right? This is something serious, and I know there's going to be some consequences, and I know that that's going to be hard for the parents as well as the student. That student comes in the office. How do you begin that conversation?
Well, I would tell you there's two versions of me
Mm,
in that specifically. The before discovering the road to awesome and the after. The before, it was, you know, okay, write your version. Okay, that's 5 days out. Go see the SRO, get your ticket, and you're gone for 5 days. It was just cookie cutter discipline. The after version, which is what I really want to focus on, that first question is, are you okay? There's a story that resonates in my mind that I got told years later, a fight that I had handled when I was building principal. I didn't typically deal with discipline that particular day. This fight happened right in front of the office. Myself, one of my assistant principals, we took the two girls separate directions. Many years later, the girl who I took out of the fight, she's a teacher now, uh, connected with me at a conference when I was a superintendent. But she told me I'll never forget that day. She said, you took me in the office and you didn't yell at me. You asked me if I was okay. You went and got the nurse. You got ice for my hand. You got me a bottle of water out of your fridge. And yes, there were consequences, but she said the last thing that you said to me when you left the office was, just make good choices. And that will always resonate with me. Thing, Frederick, I don't remember that situation
mm.
because I dealt with so many of those. But that young lady never forgot it. And I think that's the lesson here is while it may be routine for you as the administrator, it's not routine for that kid. And even in that moment, and God, I'm so grateful that I handled it the way I did. It's a teachable moment. It is a teachable moment. So checking in to make sure the kid's okay. If it was a physical altercation, get the nurse, get him some ice, take care of the kid first. You'll get to the discipline. It's not going anywhere. It's not like they're running back to class right now. Focus on that student, their well-being, and focus on the relationship you have with that student. And if you don't yet have a relationship with that student, here's a great opportunity to start the right way.
I think when we're mindful that the people are our purpose, it's much easier to focus on the person and the kid and then deal with the task, right? So that's another critical thing for especially assistant principals when you're running from fire to fire, but you've got to slow down Because if you're just worried about the fires, you're going to focus on the task, you're going to focus on the behavior. And the first thing to do is to focus on the kid. And yeah, we're in schools. Our goal is to grow kids, and kids aren't always at the place that we want them to be. So I think in a disciplined situation, we're just meeting them where they are. They wouldn't want to be there. We don't want to be there, but we're meeting the kid
Right.
where they are. And so I think taking stock of that, and I think part of the process too, Darren, is figuring out what's really going on here. So what's the root cause? Was this about the teacher, or was this about something else? And then thinking about, does the kid have the skills to actually deal with this situation, right? Is this kind of a one-off? Yeah, it's just a combination of things that created a bad event, which makes it a little bit cleaner, or is there something that we need to know? We don't want this to happen again. So we're going to need to teach the kids some skills and work with them. And it's not just about the discipline consequence of it. You talked about having them write things down. I've always worked from a framework that it is really good to have the student write down what happened, because then you have that when the because what happens is you have the conversation and there's one version of things that happen, but then the kid goes home, they're worried about getting in trouble, so they kind of reframe the events, and now they back themselves into the corner because the parent's angry at you and things have been misrepresented. So what's the value in having students write down their version of things?
I think it's twofold. First and foremost, from a legal perspective, that student is entitled to due process. The second thing is you now have this third point reference. And I'm a real big believer in the third point, very similar to what I talked about with Keith Bell in the backpack. Now, this becomes kind of an archive of the behavior. And you can use that with the student when you're going back to it and just reading through it. You can say, hey, will you tell me a little more about this? Or what did you mean here when you said this happened? Because what you really want to get to, and you've talked about this, so I won't belabor it, but you want to get to the core of the issue.
Mm.
It may not have anything to do with what actually happened, the fight, that story I told about the girl with the fight. That was the tip of the iceberg. There was so much more behind why that happened that day. Also, this is now a third point. This is a document. This is an archive for the parent.
Mm.
Because then when the parent says, and maybe this has never happened in any other school, but it happened in mine, both of mine. Um, my child would never do that. Okay, here's what your child wrote. This is their handwriting. This is their signature. I didn't coerce this. This is what they wrote. And I think I think that just gives you that documentation of, you know, just because your kid came home and told you a different story because they're afraid they're going to get in trouble at home doesn't mean that what they told you is what actually happened.
Yeah. Darren, do you just send that document automatically, or do you kind of hold it, and then if there's some kind of a challenge or parents upset, then you share that document?
So what we always did was it just became a part of the permanent record. So let's say it was a fight, the kid gets suspended. There was a suspension letter that went home, a copy of the discipline referral, provided it didn't list the other student's name. Certainly the kid can go home and tell the person, right? But there is still that, student privacy piece. So you're not going to say the other person, the kid can do it, but you're not going to. Uh, and then we always kept originals of the statements in the folder in the
Okay.
office. If the parent wanted them, happy to send it home. But usually it was not an addendum that went home because most of the time the parent's not going to question that. But when the parent does, you want to have that archive that you're able to say, hey, I'm happy to share statements with you. And you can even share the other student's statement. You just have to redact names.
Yeah. Okay. And so what's your experience in terms of the number of times or the percentage of time that when you're done with the student, they may not like the outcome, but they're like, yeah, I did that and I understand this is the outcome. And you're not getting the pushback from them, right? It comes back later from the parent. So I imagine the vast majority of times when you work through that process, the kid's like, yeah, I understand.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's very rarely the kid who is like, well, that's not fair. I don't deserve a consequence for fill in the blank. Usually, if they do, it's because they're trying to work their way out of it because they know they're going to be an even bigger situation. Perhaps they're a kid who's on probation,
Hmm.
and maybe like in the situation where I was assistant principal and then principal, we worked with a juvenile justice system that our primary juvenile judge led the state in out of area placements. She sent kids to the Boys and Girls School at the drop of a hat. And so there were times where kids, they were going to do everything they could to not face that particular judge because they knew they were probably headed to the boys' school or the girls' school. So certainly that came up, but by far and away, when pushback came, it came from parents.
Hmm.
And the parents would say things. I go right to fights. Those are the ones that seem to stand out. Those are the ones that the parents want to push back on. And I would hear frequently that, well, the other kid threw the first punch, so my kid shouldn't get in any trouble. If your kid threw 22 punches, that's not self-defense. That's engaging in a fight, right? I mean, there's a standard there, and people don't understand the standard. So that's where we'd get a lot of pushback, or, you know, sometimes it was, that teacher's been out to get our kid. And then certainly, you have the conversation with the teacher and the parent. But more often than not, it's a behavior the student has done that is a policy violation that's going to lead to a suspension. And it's probably going to be an inconvenience for the parent because now it's, well, what do I do? I'm supposed to be at work. Um, and honestly, Frederick, a lot of it leads to frustration from the parent. I mean, yeah, they're going to be mad at me because I'm the one on the phone calling and saying, hey, Frederick got in his third fight this year, and we're going to be recommending expulsion. And they're just thinking, how in the world am I even going to go to work? I mean, I can't stay home and be with him 24/7.
Hmm.
So I think there's a lot of reasons for frustrations, and I'm jumping ahead, but I don't even know if that was where you were going to go with your question.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. And what that does, I think for listeners to remember that this event, this thing may have much further reaching consequences than just what's happening in terms of the school. So I think that's a really important thing to remember. So we've talked about building capital in advance, and now we've gone through or we've met with the student. So we've got that done, we've documented, we've had the conversation. The student's like, yeah, I get it. And now we have to have the initial contact with the parent, letting them know what went happen. So can you walk us through what that process should look like?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways for you to go about this, and I've seen people do it many different ways. Certainly, you can have the student be the one to make the phone call. You can, make the phone call yourself. At a point, I had an assistant principal who was having his administrative assistant make the call. I shut that down because I don't think that's appropriate for an assistant, an admin assistant to be calling and discussing disciplinary actions with a student. If it's, hey, they skipped, if they skip their, after school detention 3 times, fine. But hey, Frederick got in a fight today and here's the consequence. And it should not be the secretary. So you can make the phone call or you can have the kid. I would recommend that you are at least the initial voice on the phone. If you've done what we've talked about in this podcast and built the relationship from the front, you can begin the conversation with, I really wish I was calling with better news, but unfortunately, we had a little bit of a situation. And I'm going to put your son or daughter on the phone and let them tell you what happened. Then I'll come back on the phone and we can discuss kind of where we go from here. I think that's a really good way to handle it. Um, and again, I know this happened in the situation that sparked this particular podcast. This eliminates the kid going and telling the parent a different story when they get home. You know,
Yep.
if just you tell them and that's just it, I don't know, man. I think you're setting yourself up for failure if you don't dot the I's and cross the T's, I guess is kind of what I'm saying.
Well, and let's all be on the same page, working with the same set of facts, right? Which is what
Absolutely.
this process does. So that's a pretty straightforward conversation. I think we make the call, we touch base with the parent, we put the kid on, they work through the situation, and then at that point, how are we going to wrap up that call? Because that's probably not going to be the most volatile. If it blows up, it's probably not blowing up at that moment.
Most likely not. I mean, it could later on, but I think I think it actually goes back to even before you pick up the phone, having a mindset. And I know you've had the opportunity to be in the room when I, teach my 8-step process for difficult conversations, but those first couple pieces happen before you even dial the phone. And that's number one, what is it that I want to have come out of this conversation? And again, thinking about the relationship you have with that parent. If you've not yet had the opportunity to build a relationship with that parent, then what steps might you take? Um, and then the second piece is, what do I want to see happen as a result of this conversation? I don't want, do you want it to just simply be hey, here are the facts, here's what happened, see you later? Or do you want this to be a conversation where you at least open the door to, you know, I want to support you. I want to support your kid. I really like your kid. And we're going to separate the behavior from the kid. Those kinds of things. So frame first in your mind. What do I want this conversation to be? Because that will, I think, frame how you show up in the conversation. Is if you you go into the conversation with, and I'm going to follow my sword here. Um, I went into quite a few early in my career as I was in charge of discipline and attendance those first 2 years as an assistant principal. And, there were a handful of them that I just, I was like, I was angry at the parent too. Like, you know, there was, I had a set of 3 daughters that went through this, is a quick bird walk, but the first 2 were there at the same time. And man, they both love to get in fights. One time they even got in a fight with each other in the hallway. And yeah, you can't make these things up, right? And that phone call was just so I called mom. I mean, at that point, I knew mom's number by heart and called her from my cell phone in the hallway right after I wrapped it up and just said, just come get these 2. And uh, you've got to go in with the right mindset. Are you just simply, gonna come at the parent and attach the child and the behavior to the parent too, or are you going to come in as an ally? So I would say that's a big part of it. And then to the core of your question, how do you wrap that up? I
Darren,
think a lot of
can I just, I want to
please,
interject
please,
because you
yes,
triggered something for me. Just like we begin the conversation with the student, are you okay? Before we begin that conversation with the teacher, I think you said this, but I want to draw people's attention. You better check in with yourself, right? What emotions are you feeling? And hey, you may have had all kinds of stuff that you had to do, and now this kid got in this fight and they're blowing up your whole afternoon, and it's frustrating, and mom or dad's going to be upset. So you may be carrying all that emotion. And then also think about the story you're telling yourself about the parent. And I remember when I was a special ed coordinator, something had happened. I went into my superintendent's office and I was just complaining about the parent. And he said, Frederick, do you think that they got up in the morning and thought, I'm going to be a terrible parent today? No. Do you think they're doing the best they can? Yeah. So are you going to meet them where you think they should be, or are you going to meet them where they are? And that's been transformative for me, understanding even with the most difficult parents, they're doing the best they can. And so my job is to meet them with dignity and to do what I can to help them do a little bit better. But it's not to judge them.
No, I agree with that 100%. And I think I think even, that check-in with the kid that we talked about, if you can find a way to do that check-in with the parent at the, early part of that conversation, even just I know the answer is probably no, but is this an okay time for us to talk?
Mm,
Just, but if you just dive right in with, hey, is this Mr. So and so or Mrs. So and so, and then you just rifle right in. Yeah, I mean, maybe they're in traffic, maybe you know, they're sitting in front of their boss, or they're having a hard day at work or whatever, right? I mean, there's so many things that scenarios that could be going on. Just that pause, that hey, is this an okay time?
mhm.
Because again, the kid's not going anywhere. If especially if it's a situation where the kid is, going to be suspended or something like that, they're safe. They're with you. If it's, hey, can you call me back in 10 minutes? Absolutely. I have no problem with that. You take care of what you need. And then, hey, here's my work cell phone number. You shoot me a text when you're ready and I'll give you a call.
Mm,
Just that courtesy, just that meeting them, like you said, where they are. And man, just understanding that they're a human being, that in and of itself takes their temperature back down, allows their shoulders to come down, and now they can actually hear what you have to say and what the kid has to say, rather than be in this defensive, angry, frustrated space because, I mean, maybe you took them out of a really critical meeting
mhm.
or something like that. And they're frustrated with that. No, it's not your fault, but give them the grace that they deserve as a human being. And odds are strong they may repay that.
Yeah. Okay. So we make that contact with the parent. We check in with ourselves first. We know what we want to achieve. We have the call. The student explains what happened. We kind of inform next steps. Here's where we're headed, and then what?
I think we want to offer help,
Mm,
even if it's just what simply can I do to support you? Remind them we're all on the same team. Remind them this doesn't make me happy that I had to make this call, but something that can extend the relationship, that it isn't about conflict, that it isn't about us versus you, that, again, if you've done a good job of separating the kid from the behavior, then hey, here's how I'd like to help you. Here's what we'd like to offer. We want to help grow the skills that your kid needs, that, when these situations happen again, that maybe they handle it a little bit better and that we can support them. And I think when you offer those types of supports, and they're not always going to, accept those. Another leader that I support just started supporting here not long ago, just went through a similar situation, and the parent refused any extra support that I genuinely think the kid probably needs, but that's fine. The parent gets to make the choice. But at least if you're offering those elements, those opportunities, then you're at least extending the hey, we're on the same team together versus you're just going to do it my way, like you said earlier.
yeah. Well, yeah, I think ending that with that optimism, and I think making sure that you affirm the value and the dignity of the student, and we can always be hopeful, and we should be taking the steps that are going to encourage success. So when the kid does come back, or whenever the whatever the consequence is and whatever the next steps are, that we are supporting that child and that we can be optimistic about, yes, we think we can make progress here, right?
Right. Well, then I think too, there's an element there where depending on the time of year, depending on what's happening, like, we're recording this in what is for basically everybody the last week leading into the holiday break. So if something were to happen today, the kid might miss final exams, or they might miss, some important, content in the classroom. They might, if it's an elementary school kid, they might miss the Christmas party, or, something like that. I think being open to and offering some type of, let's work together for, helping your kid re-enter the right way, whether that's let's have a meeting together and talk about what you need, or it's, what, we're going to have a plan before this week closes out so that your kid knows how they're going to be able to take their final exams. We'll give them an incomplete. We're going to give them time. That way, that extra burden of what about the work they missed? What about, the content, the time in the classroom? We can find the best way possible. Now, certainly with Google Classroom and some of those kinds of things, it's a little bit easier. But, in the case of an elementary school kid, if they're missing the holiday party or something like that, you're not going to get that on Zoom. It's just not going to happen, right? Or, right. Or Google Meets or whatever. So I think it's really important to talk about, the missed instruction, missed assignments. Here's how we're going to do that, rather than just, and this, I was guilty of this one, hey, we'll gather up their assignments, and some teachers were really good about that. Some weren't. So let's make sure we have a really good wraparound plan so that, again, the student has the opportunity to continue to develop. The behavior is set aside, with consequences are served, whatever. But let's continue to have this child have an opportunity to be successful in our school, because that's ultimately what our goal is, and that should be what the parents' goal is. More than likely, it is.
Okay, so we wrap up our parent conversation. Let's kind of transition to just the ways in which we might be exposed to parents that are really angry. So it could be
Yeah.
that we finish the conversation and we think everything's good, and then they go home and something else happens, and then they get really mad. And so they're going to call us up, they're going to come in, whatever. It could be a situation where we're trying to close this call out, or we're getting to the point where we've shared this stuff and they blow while we're still on the phone. It could also be a situation that we actually aren't aware of, where something happened in a class and
I,
teacher said something to a student, and the student took that a certain way, and so there's all kinds of stuff
oh
going
yeah.
on behind the scenes. When you come in contact with that angry person, what's our kind of front line response to dealing with somebody that's really agitated?
This is something I learned when I moved from the assistant principal role into the principal role. And I learned it in a couple of ways. One, it's amazing the difference with how parents speak to you when you're an assistant principal versus the building principal.
Mm.
And I don't know what it is, but there's just a difference in terms of how. It doesn't mean they don't still yell at you or use inappropriate language. I mean, I got F-bombed a couple times as a superintendent, so that doesn't necessarily change. But a lot of it, I think, had to do with how I approached it. And I learned this from the principal I worked under as an AP, who I thought was just a master at these conversations. What I learned from him was talk a whole lot less and listen a whole lot more. I said it earlier, they want to be heard. I think even in the situation with the angry basketball parent, just give him an opportunity to be heard. There were several times at athletic contests where we had a parent getting really riled up, and Dr. Wemling would just go over and sit with them And he didn't go over and scold him. He didn't go over and say, you behave or you're going to be thrown out or, he would just tell me what's going on. What's and man, he was so good at that. And I never reached his level, but I think I got better and better and better at being the one to just listen. I think of situations like you probably dealt with a lot, but that would be contentious IEP meetings where, the parent brings a lot of baggage into the meeting, multiple years. And again, I was a high school principal. So for me, this is kind of my primary frame of reference. But the parent who would come in with 7 or 8 years of baggage of just being told this is what we will do and not being given an opportunity and not being heard. And then the next thing you know, they're bringing an advocate to the meeting, and people are like, oh my gosh, they're bringing an advocate. Whose fault is that? It's probably ours.
Hmm.
Maybe we should be listening to them a little bit more. So I think I think the most important thing is you got to give them a chance to be heard. Don't just cut them off. Don't just, no, that's not how it's going to be. If their language is inappropriate, invite them to speak with you in a different space. The angry basketball parent, can we just go out here in the hallway? Every gymnasium in the world has two different ways in and out of the gym. Don't go out where the snack bar is, go out the other door. At my school, those other set of doors went to where our pool was. Rarely did we have a swim and basketball event at the same time. But find a place where you can just go and listen to them. That's all.
Yeah.
I think if you just start there, it's not always going to work. But again, they just want to be heard. And so um, that was the number one thing that I learned is just talk a whole lot less and just listen a whole lot more. And I'll add this. I know I'm talking a lot here, but listen so well that you can paraphrase what they said. Ask them, am I hearing you correctly? Here's what I heard you say. Oftentimes, if you do that, they might be like, well, no, that's not what I meant. Okay, but that's what I heard you say. And that might make them go, okay, well, I need to cool my own jets here. Perfectly fine. You are kind of that mediator, if you will, whenever possible. So that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, and the calmer that you can stay, the more likely of de-escalation, right? Because if we're getting tense and we're getting angry and we're getting big and communicating that frustration, that just ratchets things up. You know, you talked about special education, and it's an area where we think a lot about litigation. And my
Mm-hmm.
superintendent told me something that has always stuck with me. He said, Frederick, parents don't sue you because you broke the law. They sue you because they feel disrespected. And you could do everything 100% right in all of the special ed process. You can still get sued. I mean, you may win, but people can bring lawsuits anytime they want. So the
Right.
way to not get sued is not to do everything by the letter and dot your I's, cross your T's. Yes, that's important. But the way to not get sued is to respect the parents, listen to them, and figure out what their concerns are, and then address their concerns.
Oh, absolutely. I think that is really wise advice. Folks, if you didn't catch that, like hit the back 15 seconds button twice and listen to it again and write down that quote. That is really, really powerful. I think again, it's back to the listening. It's get to the core of what is it that they want. You know, a lot of times when the parent calls and they're angry, they may not even necessarily expect you to, change the decision that was made in the IEP meeting, change the outcome of the disciplinary action. The basketball parent the other day was like yelling at the AD, like, you have to get better referees. I mean, come on, okay. Now I know what you want, but I can't do that. It's not like he's got this laundry list of Oh, these two guys aren't refereeing in the NBA tomorrow night. I can grab them. It doesn't work that way, right? But I think it's important to get to the core of what they want. Now, sometimes it's just not that easy. And sometimes they go into attack mode and they try to make it personal.
Hmm.
And they'll say things specifically about you that are going to get your dander up. I'm curious, Frederick. I'm certain you faced this. I mean, there's no way that you were a SPED coordinator and did not have somebody make it personal, not asking you to tell the story. How do you respond? What advice do you give leaders when that angry individual wants to make it personal?
Well, about 50 million thoughts jump to mind. I think
Taking it to Facebook, by the way, is not an acceptable answer.
no, the first thing is taking the deep breath and realizing, hey, this is not about me, right? This is not about me. So that would be my first response. I've not
I
been in
think
that
that's
situation many times, Darren.
yeah. Oh,
Thankfully.
wow, you're a lucky man. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
And
I
I don't
wasn't
think I
an assistant
necessarily had a
principal,
bunch.
so
Yeah. I only, I think I only had a few that it got really personal. And, that one of them, it was my own fault. I made the mistake of having a listed home phone number.
mm,
Didn't have a listed home phone number the entire time I was a teacher. Then I get an assistant principal job and have a listed home phone number. That was dumb. But I think you're right. Take the deep breath, take the high road. Don't allow it to be personal. In other words, don't then go back at them.
mhm.
Don't turn it into a battle because I guarantee you'll lose. Even if you walk away from the argument thinking you won, you lost. I guarantee it. So you've got to make sure that you never lose sight of when it's when it's that situation, you are expected. Not even that. That's not the right word. You absolutely have to be the professional because you are being paid to be in that situation. Whether you think about that at the time or not, you are a professional and you are paid to be in that situation. So act like a professional. And when you do, as hard as that will be, that's going to pay off in the long run for you. But man, it's tough. I've told the story on my own podcast, I think at least once, of the grandmother that came in my office when I was a superintendent. And before she even had sat in the chair, had dropped probably four F bombs and called me several names. I just simply reopened the door and told her, you can leave now.
Mm.
And I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get angry. And she just looked at me and I said, you don't get to speak to me or anybody in this organization in that manner. When you're ready to have a respectful conversation, please come back. I would love to help you. I'd love to hear what you have to say, but you're not going to talk to me that way. She came back later that day. She apologized, worked through the situation. The situation had nothing to do with me,
Mhm.
but she just decided to make it personal,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Interestingly, a few months later, we ended up hiring her in our cafeteria. And and it was amazing when they came to me and said, Darrin, we probably would never bring to you a cafeteria aide hire, but,
Mm.
and in the interview, she said, I treated the superintendent poorly and he didn't allow it. I want to work somewhere where nobody's allowed to be treated that way.
Mm.
How about that? She was a great worker too. Wonderful lady. I caught her. She caught me, but I caught her on a really bad day. And she needed someone to say, yeah, that's not okay. And fortunately, it worked out well for us.
Mm. Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that. I, I think the final thing that I have is to remember that a lot of parents have had very negative experiences in school, maybe as students, but also maybe with previous administrators. So you may be coming at this with fresh eyes and feeling good about building a relationship with the parent, but they could be coming in with all kinds of previous triggers that, you don't have insight into. And that just goes back to listening, right? Because those triggers may come up and they're going to tell you about how the last principal did this, and this. Again, listen. And the other thing is, I think, you mentioned this, but try to avoid defending. And you don't want to throw your teachers under the bus, but when the parent is complaining and angry, that is not the time to push back on everything, because that's communicating, oh, I don't hear you, right? I'm listening, but I don't hear your frustration. Let them get that stuff out without getting defensive.
Right. Well, and I think it gets back to, I love that you said that. It gets back to something I mentioned earlier too. Just listen so well that you can paraphrase. Because when you use that particular skill, by the way, I think one of the most overlooked skill for any leader in any walk of life is the ability to paraphrase, because it requires deep listening. It's the opportunity, one, to acknowledge, hey, I hear you, and two, to make sure you heard them correctly and that they said what it was that they really wanted to say. So I think that's a really, really important element. And you bring up such an important part. Everybody has had different experiences in schools. And, a lot of times, and, we joke about this in education all the time that, just because you went to school doesn't mean you know how to run a school. It's like you or I getting on an airplane and telling the pilot, hey, you know, I got this, 119 flights for me, by the way, in 2025. Yeah, I was on a plane enough. I got this. No, no, I don't. I don't know how to fly a plane. I don't have the first clue, right? I know how to sit comfortably and stream Netflix. So I think listening for those cues, those past experiences, and don't just leap to, well, I'm not the previous principal. You can say whatever you want. You got to prove it with your actions. And you prove it first and foremost by really listening to them and offering the opportunity. They may or may not accept it, but offer the opportunity to joint problem solve. You don't have to have all the answers. A lot of times, we don't give parents enough credit. A lot of times, I mean, they may have a really good idea for how to handle a situation. But if we just think, well, we're the professional and we know what we're doing and you don't, so go back there and sit and coach, I'll fly this plane. That's that's not very helpful either. So you make some extremely important points there. So yeah, be a great listener and understand they're going to bring baggage to the conversation, and if you can find ways to unpack that baggage with them, that's when you start to build an ally with that parent instead of building an adversary.
Darren, I think that is a great place to wrap this up, right?
I think I would agree.
Yeah, work on the partnership and carry it forward. Oh, all right, my friend. Thanks for coming on and helping us dive into any of this.
Yeah.
What I guess is kind of the one big takeaway from this show, do you think, for listeners?
Oh man, I would say that as a leader, your role begins with being a listener.
Mm,
And the more that you can really lean into that, don't get so caught up in, hurry up, process the IEP, the discipline issue, the whatever it is. Focus on being a listener and building relationships. I think those are my big takeaways. And thank you for coming on. Yeah, because we're pushing this on both shows. Thank you for coming on and having this conversation. I think this is extremely valuable. What is your biggest takeaway from this episode?
It's not about you. It's just not about you. And I think that leads to what you just said. The most important thing is listening. But when you can remember it's not about you, it makes it a lot easier to listen.
Yes, 100%. Man, this has been awesome. I love it.
All right. Thank you so much, my friend.
All right, man. That was such a great conversation with Dr. Buskey. I was really glad that Frederick reached out and said, "Hey, Darrin, let's jump on a podcast and have a conversation about this." And very quickly, we both decided, look, this has to go out on both of our shows. We have to make sure that as many ears as possible can hear this particular conversation. If you don't already follow the Assistant Principal podcast, please click on the show notes and get down there and make sure you're following Frederick as well. And now it's time for a pep talk. So earlier this week, I had a conversation with a leader that I support. And one of the things he talked about was how we tend to slow play movement, how we tend to slow play driving change in our schools. He shared with me a story of a district he had worked with previously to the district he is currently in, where I'm supporting him. And he said very much so that in that particular district, there was a change that was made that, in his own words, was a shock to the system. In essence, that district used the change they were making and essentially cut off any access to what had been done previously. So people had no choice but to simply figure it out and move forward. Now, they gave them plenty of support, plenty of training, but they didn't allow them to sit back and rest on the way it's always been. Now, I'm not advocating for us to use the shock to the system for literally every change that we make, but it made me sit back and think, how often did I slow play a change when I simply could have said, hey, you know what? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to just simply jump in and we're going to go forward and we're going to burn the boats, if you will, on what we've done in the past when it relates to this one specific thing. Sometimes that might be the very necessary step to actually making change sustainable. That's what I've got for you this week, folks. Just kind of think about this one. Maybe there's a change you've been slow playing, and it's time for you to say, hey, let's go shock the system. Again, as always, I appreciate you joining me here on the Leaning into Leadership podcast. Get out there. Have a Road to Awesome week.